Since I introduced you to the basics of materials and some of the material types, I would like to go a little bit more in depth by just what you can do with those different material blocks. So I have created a very simple scene here, just with a sphere. I have two area lights that illuminate my sphere from the front. And I have a bigger, softer area light on top that just illuminates the back a little bit. And this is, for example, the way how the scene looks like. And I gave the ground plane kind of like a checker texture. Now my first material I would like to talk about is just, again, the basic diffuse material. So you see it just has a basic diffuse kind of like building block. So you do not see any reflection or anything. There's something with roughness. When you play with it, the difference is very minimal, but basically it still affects a little bit how the light could be scattered over the surface. And you see this area now is a little bit darker. Those rim parts are a little bit brighter. If I set it to 0, you see the effect is a little bit different. So this one looks a little bit more softer, or maybe more three-dimensional. Flatter is, for example, the way how this one looks like. But again, this is just diffuse material, so this means a very flat, matte surface, no reflection, anything else. Now let's say you would like to have this diffuse base, but like shininess over it. Instead of just mixing diffuse or something, you could simply select a glossy material. You can give the glossy material a color. So besides white, you see everything else then is tinted. And then with the roughness, for example, I set it to 3. I started to make this look like maybe a very basic anodized aluminum material that is sandblasted, because as you can see, the reflection is very grainy, very blurred. That basically means the surface is kind of like roughened up, like what you see with iPads or iPods, etc. So if, for example, you would like to have a clear glossy, it's basically the same material, just the roughness is set to a really small minimum. It's not really that in real life you have a surface that is perfectly smooth. That hardly doesn't really exist in real life. And very often just a tiny value of roughness. This is too much. Still too much, maybe, yeah, 0.01. Gives a little bit of softness to that reflection. And maybe 0.05, yeah, kind of like this. This basically pushes it more towards realism and takes it out of typical computer-generated images that look simply too perfect. Now, let's take a look at the next material, coated glossy. So what you see here is actually just two glossy materials, and they're mixed together by using a Fresnel node. And let me re-image this for a moment. And if you take a look at the rendering, you can see actually there's a sharp highlight here, and on the background there is kind of like, looks like the surface is glowing. So think about this maybe like a car paint where you have reflective metallic flakes or something like that. And then on top you put a clear coat of clear lacquer over it. So to rebuild this, as you can see, my starting point is, for example, a glossy material that is roughened up, kind of like serving as my base material. Then I have to add a mix shader and then add another glossy material. Mix those together. But then the problem is, as you can see, I can adjust the mix volume, how much, for example, from the background glossy and the top glossy I can see. But this is very uniform. And all I want is just maybe more along the edges to be this reflection stronger. So Shift A, input Fresnel, and plug this one in. And then you can see that to the edge, this reflection is stronger, and to the center, this reflection is stronger. And also you see the order is important. So my base material is being overlaid with this material. So this one goes in first, this one goes in second. So in case, for example, I would flip those, you would see now that thanks to the Fresnel, this material I see more at the edge, and this material I see at the center. Okay, so that's, for example, how you can create a material that looks similar to something we would do out of or through multiple codes in real life. Then let's take a look maybe at glass. So here you see like the glass material, and I have this texture on the ground floor. You can see how, for example, this index of reflection can bend or not bend this pattern. This is kind of like the light bending or refraction. And glass can also be milky. Then, for example, we simply increase the roughness. And then you can see what's behind it, but that look is blurred. And you see then that also affects, for example, the glossiness of the top part. But now, in case you would like to still have this milkiness or diffused look, but have a clear coat effect on top, then again, input Fresnel, shader, mix, connect this, and then shader, glossy, patch this in. And now this, for example, looks like a glass that is polished and maybe has kind of like a milkiness inside. Translucent is simulating a material basically where kind of like it simulates maybe like silicone would look like. So if you compare this to diffuse and translucent, so it looks like a very, very soft surface. The big difference is the transition of highlight and shadow is working differently, giving you this feeling of this being a volume where light can penetrate through and illuminate the material. Now think about maybe you would like to have a really small shininess on it. So because you can have diffused silicone that's slightly polished. So again, to get this, we would have to add a small glossy value to it. And there you see this is basically the same translucent material, just with a glossy note added to it. And then really starts making it look more like something reflective. And maybe can lower the roughness value. And maybe by the mix factor we can decide how far maybe of the reflection I would like to see. So you see there's actually a lot of creativity and influence you can have. And now in this, from this view, it's a really nice highlight along this edge we can see. And of course, the bigger I make the roughness, then this highlight loses a little bit of strength, so it's not as bright, but it's overall a little bit bigger. Then we also have the transparent material. This is actually, I would say, more physically not necessarily correct material, because in real life we do not have something that is just clear, transparent, and does not bend light. But we can use this sometimes to make renderings go faster. And even if, for example, this is the material you would like, so let something should look really thin, so without any light bending, but I would like to have a little bit of reflection on it, then again, I can combine this with a glossy and a Fresnel shader. But then you see this also looks very close to glass, but it does not have the reflection in the background. And I could go to glass and, for example, here say I turn my index of reflection off. So you see that it actually starts to look quite similar. So there's a certain amount of overlap between all those different nodes, of course. But you will see like where maybe which one might be very usable. Yeah, and that's actually really everything you need to know about your first set of materials. And again, if you kind of like as an advice, when you go around, take objects, take a look at it, pay attention to how clear are reflections, how do the reflections look like, where do you see the reflections, for example on the rim and on perpendicular faces. So you start developing an eye for how real world materials look like, because you can really, as I tried to show it here, break it down into diffused, glossy, and then of course a mix, translucent, and glass or transparent with light bending. And that's basically it.